a lot of software projects are important. Typically, we're talking about, your company data, your client's data. We're talking about performing specific functions. And in some cases, the software is doing something really, really important. It could be life-saving, right? So let's talk about that a little bit about, intellectual property risks, data security risks. What are some of the risks and what do people need to think about if they're going to be outsourcing a project?
The whole security aspect is a pretty interesting thing to talk about because in the United States, people are very familiar with how strong our contract laws are. And I think there's a tendency to assume it's that way all over the world. But, if as soon as you start to think about it, especially if you think about specific examples like China, you hear about them ripping off our IP all the time.
Yeah.
And so, one of the challenges is controlling the copyright of your application and then enforcing infringements of the copyright. Just go to Google or whatever search engine you're using and look up instances of copyright infringements from other countries, and you'll see very quickly that it's very difficult to enforce it. So, one thing that is really important if you decide to offshore your project is to make sure you have control and the security protocol in place to mitigate that risk, which can be things that you do. For example, maybe you keep all your data out of their hands. They never touch the production data, or, very strict user roles and permissions in the different softwares that they have access to. Maybe they don't have the access to the entire code base. There's probably other ways you can do it. I'm not a IP lawyer by any means, right? So maybe there's something you could do in term discussing with a lawyer and saying, hey, what can we do to really protect ourselves when we're working with this country? And they'll probably be able to point you in a better direction than I will. But that's definitely something I would urge you to do, is take into consideration your data privacy and your intellectual property and copyright, and make sure these are things you're going to protect. And obviously, the risk goes up depending on what these are, right? If the data is incredibly sensitive, then you need even more protocol in place to protect it. Whereas, in the US, a lot of times, depending on what it is, an NDA might get you by, right? Just a standard confidentiality agreement saying, hey, I'm not going to share this data. That might be all you need. But again, disclaimer, speak with a lawyer, see what you can do if you decide to go offshore. But definitely, it's something worth thinking about and something worth talking about. It's sad to see all of the different stories about data leaks and copyright infringement coming out of other countries. And hopefully, I'm sure there's a strong effort by these countries to strengthen their contract laws.
Yeah, I mean, nobody ever thinks it's going to happen to them, right? And but especially if you're fishing in a really big pond like this, you got to know what's out there, and that's a big risk.